Hey guys, good evening. So we're on episode 8 of Upaj, and tonight I'm finally getting to interview my favorite Sarodia from the current era of Indian music. So guys, please welcome the killer, the absolutely brilliant Arnab Chakrabarty Dada with us.
Hi, Swarnabha. Thank you so much for having me here, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for making the time to join us.
Hello. So happy to have you here on Upaj with us. We absolutely love your music, and I am a huge fan of yours, like for a long time now. And we have also known each other for a long time now.
I know
And
from ages. Yeah, so it's great to be here. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
thank you for agreeing on this. So, without much ado, I'll start off with our first question, which is, of course, the most cliched one. So, how did your musical journey commence? And we have read about your first guru, Pandit Brij Saab. So, I would love to know some of your great memories from that era when you had just started as a student of Indian classical music.
So my musical journey is, I guess, shared by about half of the population of professional Hindustani musicians today, in the sense that I didn't really have a professional musician in the family. I don't come from a family of musicians. Although to say that there was no music at home would be a half truth, because my mother did train quite seriously as a Khayal singer and studied with several luminaries of the art form. So I was exposed to this music right from my infancy. Um, the real interest in listening to ragas erupted when I was probably around 3 years old, when long playing records, which were essentially a compilation of 78 RPMs of Pandit D.V. Paluskar and Ustad Bade Ghulam Ali Khan Sahab, were played by my parents in the house. And I was hooked to Paluskar ji's music, and I'm told that there exist recordings of me trying to imitate those recordings vocally at that age. Of course, it's very good blackmail material because I had a thin voice and could barely hold a note. But fast forward about 6 months, I started learning how to play the tabla when I was about 3.5. I know that's everybody starts their music in Hindi. It's such a cliche, right? I started at the age of 3. But around about that age, I didn't know what I was doing. I just used to bang around on the tabla and so on. But I studied tabla for a period of about 10, 12 years. And some of it was simultaneous to my study of the Sarod. I started on the Sarod a few years, 3, 4 years later. And that too, there was a phase when I was playing on a small acoustic mandolin before that. And I was virtually untrained and self-taught. So I would just play whatever khayal bandishes my mother was learning and practicing at that time on the mandolin. And it also helped that by the time I was about 6 years old, I was able to play one cycle of a fairly slow Vilambit Ektal on the tabla, accompanying my mother, who was at that point, although she was a physics teacher, a career physics teacher, she was preparing to take an MA final exam in music in the year 1986. So that was around the time where my sense of tal was also being cemented. And it was very much, it was attained not through the typical practices of instrumentalists that we are aware of today, but by playing Vilambit thekas like Ektal and Jhumra. This was my pathway into sort of becoming a bit rhythm conscious. So I started with Pandit Brijnarayanji because he was the only Sarod teacher in Bombay. And he was a young musician at that point, younger than I am today. So in that sense, he was not a very experienced teacher, but I think he did the best he could for all students. He was a very sincere teacher. He was very clear that there would be no further lesson if you didn't practice the lesson that was given. The standard way of making sure that you get your work done. Yeah. And it's nice in a way that, I've moved on. I studied with so many other people over the years, including a very long spell of study with Pandit Buddhadev Das Gupta ji. But Brijnarayanji has remained a person who's still as kind and friendly as he was back then. So it's one of those things that, perhaps because he knew me when I was very young, he still thinks of me as a kid. And we've always, despite the fact that I moved on and studied with other teachers, we've remained on very good terms.
That is something, Dada, which we see is pretty rare usually.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is indeed.
There are like so many
there
examples.
are ups and downs. Yeah, absolutely, you're right. I mean, the films have been made about it at this point.
Absolutely. Films, TV shows, you name it, it's there in pop culture.
Of course. Oh yeah, TV shows too. Yeah, absolutely. So
okay.
So yeah, that's what it was like. Yeah, so sorry.
That's actually a pretty different story than most of the instrumentalists I come across. Like everyone at least maybe 70 to 75% of the instrumentalists, including myself, I come across, we start off with our own instrument, and you started from a completely different point of view, from a khayaliya's point of view, from a tawaliya's point of view, and then it's like probably the perfect way to go, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, in a way, it might have been perfect, but I was not prepared because I didn't have the maturity as a 7, 8 year old when you're starting a new instrument. Okay, I might have at that point already internalized, dozens of bandishes, but did I really understand them sufficiently, or did I even know what they meant on a deeper musical level? I don't think so. So I don't think that in that sense, there are um, there are prodigies, and then there are students like me who were okay, who enjoyed music, but I had a life outside of it too, growing up. Doing playing sports, being reasonably decent academically. Uh, yeah, so my existence was not defined by music at that point in time. So there are pros and cons. It goes both ways.
No, no, absolutely. At least you were concerned with your academics and sports. I used to just watch cartoons and kill time.
Right. No, my we didn't have a TV until I was about 7,
Right.
and then the
Yeah.
TV that we had was barely functional. For the first 10 years or so. So there wasn't much of an outlet in that form.
Okay. So I think I'll move on to the next question. So where we come to your next gurus. So you have been trained by some absolute stalwarts of the Shahjahanpur Gharana, which is my favorite baaj in Sarod playing, and I've been in awe of their playing style for years now, and it's just so beautiful. And you have studied with greats like Dr. Kalyan Mukherjee and Pandit Buddhadev Das Gupta ji, and currently you've been receiving talim from the Khalifa of the Shahjahanpur Gharana now, Ustad Irfan Muhammad Khan Sahab. So, how has that entire Shahjahanpur experience been for you?
Well, it's difficult to say that it's one extended experience, but it has been great in the sense that it's a distinctive style of sarod playing, and dare I say, the oldest as well. And although saying that it's the oldest style of sarod means nothing, because there have been so many individuals who have contributed along the way, that it's as contemporary as it is old. That's the case for all of Hindustani music, really. So each teacher in this style that I have encountered had a different approach to teaching and to music. Of them, Buddhadev ji was possibly the best known performer. Also, a teacher of great merit, especially when it comes to teaching technique, teaching the operational parameters of the sarod and how to wield the instrument in a most efficient way. I think one can rarely find a bit better teacher than him in this aspect as to how you acquaint yourself with the instrument, learn how to play well coordinated, um, you know, play tunefully, and have good picking technique. These were his main concerns as a teacher. And he would also try to bind you within the rag in such a way that you wouldn't make any conscious or subconscious raga errors. So he would devise these teaching guts and teaching tans, which would essentially tie you within the confines of a rag very carefully and limit your thought process, or your, I wouldn't say limit, but ensure that your thinking never violated the basic constructs of a rag, the phraseology, the grammatical ideas, and everything. So, in that sense, it was a very effective, although some might say a little, shall I say, assembly line or industrial method of teaching, but is very effective. When I went to Kalyan Mukherjee Sahab, Kolanda as I called him, I was a mature musician, more or less. I mean, I was at that point 25 or 26 years old. And at least in terms of my um, technical command over the instrument, I was more or less okay. I wasn't superlative or anything, but I was okay. He helped that aspect as well because there are so many things, finer things that I wasn't aware of that he actually helped. He helped me achieve better coordination of the hands. He helped me with covering all three octaves on the sarod effortlessly, which is something that you might have seen me play some, fairly, shall I say, tons of fairly wide range in terms of tonality. That's his contribution. And then I think he also brought my aesthetic, helped me bring my aesthetic closer to that of his guru, Pandit Radhika Mohan Moitra. I mean, as you heard in the alap that we just played prior to beginning this session, he was instrumental in shaping my aesthetics in that sense, and also retaught me a lot of things that I had learned in a certain way, but he wanted me to learn them as his guru had taught him. So there was a lot of relearning of things that I already knew, and also, lots of learning of new material. In the 5 years that I had with him, I think he made a very distinct contribution to the shaping of my music or my musical personality as we see it today. And with Khan Sahab, Irfan Muhammad Khan, as I call him, Ustadji, it's been very, very different in the sense that he also takes great pleasure in revising stuff that I've already learned and going through many drafts of a rag. But his approach is actually remarkable in the sense that he has ready skeletal alaps in every rag that he teaches. Ready as in these are not just templatized, they're not just templates for improvisation, they're ready-made alaps. And they're very informative. So if you actually memorize and internalize these alaps, and of course in a concert or even in my practice, I'm free to do what I want. But if I actually internalize the actual, very precise draft of an alap that he's giving me, it gives me a lot of pathways and skeletal phrases to elaborate upon. So his approach is, look, here's the meat on the bones, okay? You can add whatever you want to it. You season it as you like. But you've really got to work on this, internalize this fully. So that gives you a lot of stock material to work with. And I think this sort of teaching is really lacking today, especially in instrumental music. And then, of course, Khan Sahab has a huge stock of guts, nearly 400 guts, of which he has already taught me over 200 across about 120 rags. So yeah, he's got a huge wealth of knowledge that he's received from his father and uncle, respectively Ustad Umar Khan Sahab and Ustad Ilyas Khan Sahab, the great sitarist of Lucknow. Yeah, so three different masters, three very different approaches.
And it's very beautiful the way you have converged all the aspects of whatever you have learned into the baaj that you have today, the expressions that you have today. And I think when you just pointed these out discreetly, now I can actually spot those all over your music.
Yeah, the thing is, ultimately I do my own thing. And, that's kind of in the spirit of what Kulanda was, trying to get across to me. Is that, okay, you absorb all the teachings, but they have to go through your filters, get processed in your head, and they have to come out in a way that finally works for you. Mm, and of course, Ustadji, on the other hand, is a huge stickler for correctness, and sometimes I annoy him, most of the time. But that's okay. That goes with the territory. I've come to accept it.
And now that you've mentioned so many different aspects of the same gharana, like the same instrument, I would love to know how the baaj of Shahjahanpur evolved across the old masters and then to the contemporary musicians, and what stayed and what changed.
I think it's really a question of stuff being added. Nothing's really disappeared in the sense that, yeah, I mean, certain aspects of alap jod, which we play, have evaporated from other styles of sarod. We spent quite a bit of time playing gamak jod. Then we have certain aspects like the Ladi Jod, Lad Lapet, and these things, which usually only find theoretical mention in books by musicologists, who themselves very likely don't know what they are talking about when they mention these terms, but we actually play them. I'll demonstrate some of those aspects in a bit, but
That
apart
would be
from
really
that,
kind of you.
I'll get to it. But apart from that, I really think that it's been an additive process rather than a subtractive process. So, if we go back to the days of the old masters like Ustad Sakhawat Hussain Khan Sahab and Ustad Muhammad Amir Khan Sahab, so the sarod was more or less the same. It had the string configuration, the body shape, and all of those things had more or less been finalized. But there were two things. The plate was made of iron, and the strings were made of iron and brass. And modern strings are made of high carbon steel and phosphor bronze. So, this very basic advance in the level of metallurgy available to sarod players made a huge difference to their sound. Modern sarod players are able to slide um, across a much wider melodic range, broader melodic range than sarod players from the turn of the 20th century. The reason for this is primarily the fact that the strings are better polished, made of a more durable material, and bronze is way more resonant than brass. So the Kharaj and Pancham are much nicer sounding today. So even if those great masters whose knowledge banks we are still working with might have had great designs in mind, the instrument was not capable of executing what they were capable of ideating. So this has made a big difference now. So consequently, we are able to play much longer slides. We are able to sustain phrases much longer, and hence we are able to vocalize through our instrument. So that's a big point of progress. Secondly, the variety of tans available in our library today is wider. Because, the baaj of the sarod essentially used to be, I guess, due to the fact that they had to, in some way, sustain playing at a medium or medium fast tempo, guts. The baaj of the sarod used to be something like this. I mean, it's all very nice, and there are many things you can do with this kind of vocabulary. But then, as times progress, ideas evolve, and more things were added on. For example, people started playing more sort of, shall I say, slow and flowing passages, even in gut playing, right? And then things started getting added on, things that sought to emulate the Khayal Gayaki of the time. So, Khayal singers became very focused on Firat Wali Tane, the kind of linear, rapid passages using the phrases of the rags but with equal timing. Like. So, my guru, Pandit Buddhadev Das Gupta, had a huge role in implementing this facet of Sarod playing, implementing Khayal-ang, Ikharatans, the sort of single stroke on a note, tans, to emulate this kind of khayal singing, the equal distribution kind of tans. And then Ustad Amjad Ali Khan Sahab, polished them to a great extent. So what you are hearing today among a lot of Sarod players who play this sort of tan and use this idiom of elaboration of a rag is a combination of the contributions primarily of Pandit Buddhadev Das Gupta and Ustad Amjad Ali Khan Sahab. Many Sarod players of today have polished them up to an even greater extent, I would say. Because the instrument and its vocabulary and stuff just keeps evolving and growing, right? With every generation of musicians, at least the technique of any instrument, because now the sarod is about 200, 220 years old. The longer people have been dealing with a machine, the better they get at operating it. So I would say that today what we are seeing is that we have a generation or generation and a half of musicians who are really, really good at operating this thing. Better than it has ever been, really, just in terms of the technique. So I can, count about 4, 5, 6, maybe really good, technically very fine sarod players today who can do all of this. But coming back to the question of sarod baaj, so I would say that the alap has become, so the technical possibilities in alap and jod have increased. Gut playing has become more aligned to the styles of khayal and thumri singing because the instrument allows it. Where things have gone a little awry, in my opinion, is that people need to know where to check themselves. Because just because a certain expression is possible or a wider range of expressions is possible doesn't mean that it's a free-for-all. There are aesthetic considerations while playing a rag where, for example, when you're singing a Vilambit Ektal or Vilambit Tilwada Khayal, you don't start taking like 5 successive murkis like you do while you're singing a thumri. So I remember, this master vocalist was giving a recital in Kolkata. and started talking to another great senior vocalist of that time, and he said, पंडित जी मैं तो इतना ठुमरी नहीं गाता मगर आजकल कोशिश कर रहा हूँ. So the elder gentleman basically says, अरे तुमको क्या तकलीफ है, बस ठेका बदल लेना, ठुमरी बन जाएगी. So the elder in this case was Pandit Nivruti Bua Sarnaik, who was at ITCSRA, and I shall desist. I shall not name the younger vocalist, who's recently deceased, but he was quite a star in his lifetime. But coming back to the point, this particular conversation is of great relevance. Just because you can do something doesn't mean that you do everything that you can do, and that you do everything that you can do in one concert.
I was just gonna ask you to elaborate on this a bit.
So anyway, but let's finish the point of Sarod Baaj. The other thing that we have started doing a lot is also playing sitar jhala quite a bit. So traditionally the Sarod jhala is Ulta jhala is quite the same as what we play after the jor. So when people played the Surshringar, they used to play only Da strokes because the Ra on the Surshringar is quite weak. As you know, it's played with a Mizrab, either worn or held. So the Ra stroke, especially when you hold a Mizrab and play such a large instrument, the Ra stroke's really weak. So the Jor Jhala aspect of Sarod playing, unless you are playing Dirdir at a fast speed, all the jhalas are combinations of Da and Chik, like on the sitar. But when you play guts, because you tend to go faster, the Sarod jhala traditionally was Da, Da, Chik. So this was the Sarod jhala. It's changed in the sense that once Ustad Vilayat Khan Sahab came onto the scene, I mean, he could play all of these things with great musicality at a much faster speed than whoever was playing sitar before him. I mean, there were many great masters. They all played really great sitar. But then came Ustad Vilayat Khan Sahab, and he had a really crazy work ethic. I mean, he really revolutionized these aspects of sitar playing. And Sarod players very quickly wanted to sound like Ustad Vilayat Khan. I mean, for me, some aspects of Khan Sahab's playing, they are a lifelong quest. And I don't think you'll find very many people who'll admit as much. I mean, a lot of Sarod players want to sound like Vilayat Khan Sahab, but they'll not tell you that they want to sound like Vilayat Khan Sahab. I mean, I'm a fanboy when it comes to UVK. So
I think we all are, like, all over the world. All of us were practicing this music. It's just unreal, the feats he has achieved.
Absolutely. So, this kind of jhala became with the cut. this became the standard post-Gat Jhala. This became the standard. So that's a major change. But then there's regional variation in how people play this. Regional in the sense that you'll find that a lot of musicians in Kolkata, because Bengali musicians are known to be technically very, very proficient. Especially, Kolkata musicians, let's put it that way, because it's a very competitive culture out there. They tend to play very fast, right? They'll very easily play. Some of these guys play at like 420, 450 BPM, which on the sarod is very difficult because you are actually, the muscle sets that you're using to play the sarod are larger muscle sets as opposed to, here with the sitar, you're using smaller muscles so you can go faster. But again, the caveat here is that you should do this only to the extent that it's musical. So, if you suddenly start going like super fast and just doing, so I'll give you an example of what goes on. So you have this. So what's going on? The left hand's doing nothing. Instead, slow down a bit. My point is you're trying to copy Vilayat Khan Sahab, but the main point of Vilayat Khan Sahab's music is lost. If you play that so fast that your left hand can't keep up, or your ideas freeze. So yeah, so everything in moderation, I think. But so these are the ways things have changed. And then at the end of the jhala, people these days play a long tihai, whereas people used to play jhala only to the point where they can actually play the gat after playing jhala. So, if I'm playing... This is how a gat jhala portion would end. Now, you've removed that kind of requirement where you should be able to play the gat at any speed. So now it's a free-for-all where you can just take it to an insane level. And now what do? You just start playing double strokes and, sort of you have to have a concluding kind of trick, which is this, memorized long tihai, which we all know everybody plays the same one, more or less. So yeah, these are the ways in which the actual baaj, the actual vocabulary has changed. But, many individuals have brought their brilliance, the tonal brilliance, their aesthetic excellence into the fold of sarod playing. And as I said, that 20th century Sarod playing was greatly impacted by the sheer aesthetics of Ustad Ali Akbar Khan Sahab. Um, then Pandit Radhika Mohan Moitra, Pandit Buddhadev Das Gupta, to a great extent Ustad Amjad Ali Khan Sahab. Um, and the old baaj of the Shahjahanpur Gharana melded into these individual expressions. And in that sense, Irfan Khan Sahab is unique because he actually maintains the old style of playing, where he's very concerned with using phrases in a way that his convictions demand. When I play Tilak Kamod, for example, I would do. Ustadji will never ornament as much because he strongly feels that it's not a good idea. Like, so he very strongly feels that Alap ought to be played like this. So in this sense that everybody kind of claims to be a bastion of orthodoxy, but at the same time an innovator and an experimenter and so on. So he's like, to hell with innovation and this and that. I just play what I know. And it's very refreshing to see that. I mean, I myself am rather an aggregator of things that I see around me. I'm Some people admit it openly and some don't. My point is, we are all aggregators to a great extent. But he's not. He really plays what he has learned. So in that sense, yeah, he is the real repository of the baaj, of the old baaj.
And I think the way you said it, there's like a completely different honesty, something maybe we haven't even come across in our lives as musicians in his playing, when he just says that I just play what I know.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I try my very best to be as honest as I can in my music as well. But then I have so many different reference points and different sources, which I think is really what distinguishes somebody like me, who's really a mongrel, musically speaking, as opposed to somebody who has that kind of pedigree.
Well, I think now I'm gonna ask you another cliched question just
Okay.
to clear the air of some tension. Okay, so how has Riyaz been for you over the years? Like, what are the special things that you really, really paid attention to, and how did it evolve with your musical thinking and technical prowess? And then, as you said, the art of having everything in moderation and in balance, that equilibrium. Like, how did you find that through your Riyaz?
Well, that's a very good question. I think to begin with, when the first few years of my training were patchy, because as I said, I learned initially from Pandit Brijnarayan, and then I studied with Pandit Buddhadev Das Gupta. The two masters being very different in their approaches, there were certain amounts of confusion in my own playing, and I was also beginning to, like many players of my generation, I was beginning to emulate the latter day playing of Ustad Ali Akbar Khan Sahab. As in, the not his best instances, but the kind of the old age playing. And I think in many ways, I'll be very honest with you, um, when you have an aging master with that great a reputation and such a huge following, it can create opportunities for people like myself, young people, to do the bare minimum to sound like them. Like say, assume I'm 16 and I'm trying to sound like a 75-year-old. I'm just making excuses for myself. And that's what I did for some years, for a couple of years. And I think that was a waste of time in terms of, uh, that really sort of caused my technical riyas to be neglected because I was just emulating an aging master. Um, so it took me some time, and I think in that sense, Buddhadev ji was very helpful in making me realize that, just trying to sound like a musician because you love their music without really understanding what they were capable of when they were my age is not going to be very helpful in the long run. That I really had to pull up my socks and ramp up my game, and he was very helpful in that. So he gave me left hand specific exercises, right hand specific exercises, then coordination exercises, and so on. And so that became, from about the age of 12 or 13, it became kind of part of my daily practice. Um, because I started so early, it didn't really matter that I wasted the first few years because I was still fairly impressionable and very repairable. So I credit Pandit Buddhadev Das Gupta for repairing, you know, a patchwork student, somebody who, had kind of, who was a bit of a scavenger, musically speaking, who had gone from place to place looking for scraps. So he kind of helped me put it all together. So from that point on, and I know that it's a very early age to talk about because many people start learning music when they're that age. But I'd already spent 8, 9 years learning music. So yeah, from that point on, I would just practice exercises a lot, like stuff like stuff like this. Then this this kind of stuff. I mean, this is like a left and right coordination exercise, but there are like dozens of these kinds of exercises that cover various areas. I'm just giving you a very quick, uh, summary without giving it all out. Um, and secondly, the other thing that I embarked on of my own desire to learn more was kind of trying to understand the ready-made exercises in the 35 talas of Carnatic music. So they have 7 tals in different jatis, like 5 jatis per tal. So they have these ready-made exercises for every tal, and each exercise has to be done in 4 speeds to kind of. So you have a reference line, okay, a reference speed. So suppose you are doing Rupak or R Rupak, what they will call. So basically 7 pulse tal, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So this is like a very it's not 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's not even broken down like this. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, and 1. So if my reference lay is sa re ga ma. My clapping or my timekeeping remains here. Second speed would be sa re ga sa. Sorry, sa re. So this is my basic speed. So sa re ga ma re ga pa ga ma pa dha ni. This becomes my second speed, right? Then third speed is sa re ga ma re ga ma pa pa dha ni sa ni dha pa ni dha pa ma ga ma ga re sa re ga ma pa. Third speed. So if you repeat this once again, the scale, you come back to sa. So my friend, then fourth speed would be sa re ga ma re ga ma pa dha ma pa dha ni sa ni dha pa ma ga re sa re ga ma re pa dha ni sa ni dha pa ma. So you see what's happening here, right? Your starting point keeps shifting. So you play X number of repetitions and you come back to the sum. So, but your theka does not change. So these are the lay practices. And my friend Akshay Vaidyanathan, who's a Carnatic Chitraveena player, he's a student of primarily of there's a great Vidwan called Narsimhan, who is Ravi Kiranji's father. So the Chitraveena player. So Akshay is a student of his father's. And so he helped me out with a lot of this information. Obviously, I practiced it on my own. But for a while, I formally took lessons in these exercises with a friend of mine. So that's helped me along. So I don't, as you know, that I don't do very much premeditated laikari. I don't, when I was learning from Buddhadevji, I used to, he had these kind of couple of notebooks full of tihais that he had memorized, and he would be able to rattle them off at will. And he had set them to all sorts of bowl configurations. But they were essentially premeditated, but nicely summoned as required. I used to do that. And I stopped doing it at some point because, I'd moved away from that idiom. I do occasionally play some of them, but I don't prefer to sort of, turn my entire Vilambit Gatkari into a quest for the next Tihai. But when I do need, to summon something out of thin air, I have these lay exercises. So I can kind of see the cycle. I can see the spaces, and I don't really believe anymore in having any kind of formatted laikari. So yeah, my own practice has evolved. So every day when I practice now, I start with 3 or 4 paltas. I play jhala for about, if I have time, I play for 2 sets of 10 minutes. Otherwise, I'll play jhala for set of maybe 2 sets of 5 minutes. Then I'll practice on my double strokes because in Sarod playing, as you know, this is important. So start slow. So I take a palta. Start with all da, then something like this. whether it's set to teen tal or any other tal. Tabla keeps playing the iPhone tabla, and you play that, maybe 4 sets of 5 minutes. So in that sense, my riyaz is very compartmentalized. So I play this subject, then I'll take any other tan in any rag that like. So if I'm having issues today, say I'm skipping strings while I am playing all dark strokes at a certain speed, and that's happening because of some you know muscular or nervous issue, then I'll give it special attention, like rega sa ni is on a string change. I'll do this for a minute. Okay. Suppose I'm having problems with like sometimes you have trouble with very accurate pitching of a certain thing, especially in the higher octave, because you don't have an anchoring thumb at the back here. So I'll pay special attention to that. Like see, some days I'll have this issue. So then I have to just practice. Something like this. So when I'm playing this tan, there'll be some issue there that, minute thing that needs to be adjusted or given special attention. So as I said, my practice is very compartmentalized. So I try not to waste time when I'm practicing.
Now, coming from this to your incredible technical prowess, but your approach to controlled virtuosity, that is a very interesting thing. You were just talking about having everything in balance and moderation and the perfect equilibrium where there's musicality, there's advanced thinking, and all the aesthetics are right, the rag is there. So how do you balance all that? Like, how do you approach this entire ideal of controlled virtuosity?
I don't have that perfect equilibrium, which is probably what makes me strive even today to achieve something in that domain. When I hear certain musicians, when I hear the music of Pandit Radhika Mohan Moitra from around 1960, it has that perfect equilibrium. The music of Ustad Ali Akbar Khan Sahab from the late 1940s and early 1950s, that has that equilibrium. Vilayat Khan Sahab has it for a very prolonged period of time. Amjad Ali Khan Sahab from the late 1970s. I think that's a perfect equilibrium. So I think seeing those masters, hearing them, makes you want to look in that direction rather than just playing fast or impressive stuff because I can. I mean, there is obviously an urge sometimes that there is always that pressure. There is peer pressure, but I try not to give in. And I have had some very good role models. I mean, for most of my teenage years, Pratyush Banerjee was kind of a role model for me. Also in my early 20s. And, he's one of those musicians who is incredibly capable in technical terms. I think he's one of the finest sarod players of our time. But he doesn't show off. And so in that sense, I mean, he's got tremendous chops. He's got a great sense of rhythm, great sound. But what he really tries to do is go inward and kind of focus on those things that matter musically. My guru Kalyan Mukherjee was a great example because he was actually an incredibly he was a powerhouse sarod player. Unfortunately, there aren't very many recordings of his. But he was not a powerhouse in the sense of like physically vanquishing the instrument, but actually using his brain to get around, the requirements of playing a difficult instrument. So he was a brain over brawn sort of guy. There are certain other instrumentalists who play the sarod who have used brawn over brain, but that's just as fine. Sometimes I think I'm kind of somewhere in the middle because I do uh, I do a lot of the hard practice, as they say. The kind of spending a lot of time on stamina building and so on. So when Kalyanda couldn't do something, he found a workaround because he was also a busy mathematician in his professional life. He didn't have the time to sit. Unlike me, I'll just sit here and do something like. He didn't have the time to do all this, so he'd find a workaround. So I saw both approaches, and I think because I had good role models, I was always able to find a way to moderate my urge to show off, which I had plenty of when I was in my late teens and early 20s. But over time, and I think I've had the good fortune of having had good teachers who have always reinforced the value of um, you know your musical thoughts needing to have a certain shelf life, because you can be a very showy and flashy player, but when it's not backed by substance, it's very difficult for that music to have any kind of shelf life.
I think that's the case with all the old methods of sadhana in India also. Once you get past the parlor tricks, the real thing starts.
Absolutely. And sometimes you'll also see that there is an incredibly practiced musician who's, due to whatever set of circumstances in life, not very practiced at that given moment. So the first 5 or 6 minutes of a performance by such a person will be a bit shaky. Once they've shaken off the dust, some really mind-blowing stuff comes out. I mean, it's always good to be on top of your game, but then life gets to you, right? So this is not like written or pre-composed music where you necessarily know what you're doing from the word go. Sometimes it takes it takes a musician some time to find their groove. Like I've attended so many concerts of Kishori Amonkarji where the first 15-20 minutes have been very difficult for the artist, but that struggle, I think, is also a very important part of finding the right balances in your voice or in your hands, and then commencing the journey of establishing a raga. So I think it's very important that we give an artist that time, and not expect it to be like perfect right from the word go.
Yeah, and now in like these times, 2021, everyone just wants instant gratification. So we have.
Well, there's something to be said for that. As I said, there are people who are playing all instruments at a really high level today, technically speaking. And it's great. I mean, these days, when I have a concert, I sit in the green room and warm up for 10 minutes. Because as much as I want to give a good artist enough time to warm up and be ready, I don't want to necessarily grant myself that indulgence. So I want to be ready. I don't want to take my audience for granted.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think all of us anyway maintain this or like try as much as we can to be on top of our games all the time. And because the audience these days, I think, uh, even if they're not like on your face like the old times, they are still pretty demanding and they expect a lot out of the musicians nowadays. And so I think in that light, I would totally agree with you in just trying to always be at the top of our games physically, like
I
emotional
think
thinking and
speaking of audiences and what they demand, I think unfortunately most our audiences today don't know what to demand. Because if we honestly give them what they want, I think we're really lowering the bar. Because most people who come to, so there are, I will categorize the listeners of Indian classical music in into maybe four or five categories. Okay, first of all, um, a major component of today's audience is musicians, which is nice because musicians at least know what to listen for, practicing musicians themselves. Secondly, even musicians are split up into various constituencies. Tabla players want to hear a melodic artist who plays to their gallery. Okay, tabla players want to hear a melodic artist who plays in their language. Um, and this phenomenon is highly distracting, because if I'm just to like constantly play tabla bowls on my sarod to please that lobby of tabla players, I am necessarily devaluing my music. I'll do so when it's appropriate. That'll maybe be 5 minutes or 6 minutes of my entire concert, right? But if I have to do this all the time just so that those tabla players start taking me seriously, and because they are the go-betweens today, between concert organizers and artists, because they are the most frequently seen. Every concert needs a tabla player, right? So tabla players are the go-betweens, and to be influential among them as a melodic artist, you have to shape your music in a certain way. So I refuse to do that. This doesn't mean that I can't entertain tabla players. I think many of us can entertain tabla players, and we play differently when it is like a private mehfil consisting mostly of tabla players. But when I'm playing a public concert, I have to have I have to focus on what I love doing, not on what somebody else expects of me. That's one. The next constituency among instrumentalists is this recently minted phenomenon of the Charukeshi artist, right? A Charukeshi artist is somebody who basically excels in playing. That's a term that I have coined. Someone who excels in playing ragas which are basically scalic in nature, which are derived mostly from the Melakarta ragas of Carnatic music, without really possessing the nuances of how the swaras are actually utilized in Carnatic music. Because devoid of this ornament called Kampita Gamaka, a Carnatic rag is not a rag, it's just a scale. And the applications of this kind of ornamentation is not known to Hindustani musicians. So when somebody says I'm playing a Carnatic rag on a Hindustani instrument, they're bullshitting. So, of course, it's a very nice kind of. Once you've played your main raga, it's very nice to have something for a change, something like this for a change. But if this becomes your mainstay, all that you're really doing is you are lowering the bar of melodic complexity in order to make laikari easy. Yeah, because then you can pretty much play anything that you want. You can retrofit any tan to any kind of pre-composed laikari element, and there you go. You are satisfying the demands of your corporate show audience. because
Absolutely, and I've seen instrumentalists play triad arpeggios as well. They're like 135, 135, and it's just there.
and
And
somehow doing that is supposed to be like genius or something. But hey, you have 4-year-olds doing that on a guitar. So what exactly is novel? So I know of this particular sitar player who has the vocabulary of a 6-year-old classical guitar student, right? And he utilizes that to great effect to like wow corporate audiences in India, and is the highest paid sitarist apart from a younger lady. So if this is the bar, then I think that audience preferences are best ignored.
if I had StreamYard Premium, I would for sure put a lot of overlays and banners and confetti here right now. Okay, I think we'll move on to the next part.
Sure.
So, coming back to Khayal Gaiki, so as we just heard from you, that from a very tender age, Khayal Gaiki has impacted your music in a lot of beautiful ways. So, I would really like to know on this entire journey where you could have that vocal music, the vocalization of phrases in your playing and everything. How did that flow into your music so beautifully over time? And you've also trained under Pandit Yashwant Bua Joshi for a while,
Yes.
I think.
Yeah.
So I would really, really, really love to know something about that era of you as a student.
So, okay, so this is a question in two parts. So, first of all, elements of khayal singing were always there in my mind. Whether at what point they started creeping into my sarod playing, I do not know. Because when I was actively copying Ali Akbar Khan Sahib in my early teens, or even before, um, that time I was just trying to achieve his sound. And, that's kind of it's an amalgamation of so many different influences. Khan Sahab's own playing is, as you can imagine, is very different from his father's playing, and so naturally, for somebody who grew up in an era where mass dissemination of information was not really in vogue, he must have heard dozens, if not hundreds, of musicians live. So, but what he played at the end of the day was not the contemporary Khayal Gaiki that we hear. This must have seeped into my imagination while accompanying my mother on the tabla, hearing her teachers, hearing a lot of my school friends take lessons in vocal music, and also going to, one of the local sort of vocal teachers to learn some basics of vocal music in Bombay, where I lived in Powai. So all of this had definitely had an impact. But the point at which I started to really want to use the khayal style of ornamentation, and even now, I use a lot of khayal and thumri ornamentation. But I think with the discernment that this is thumri ornamentation and this is khayal ornamentation, I don't jumble the two. So I'll give you an example. I use what the Gwalior musicians call behlawas to a great extent. Um, Now, instrumentalists typically, when I play a phrase as, they typically play not even, but for me, this is a very crude approximation of an idea. Okay, so um, this consciousness really started seeping in I think because of listening to Pandit D.V. Paluskar a lot. And also a lot of recordings of Ustad Bade Ghulam Ali Khan Sahab, which contain, which is essentially a kind of, Patiala, what is a representation of Gwalior Gaiki, with many more quicksilver ornaments added to it. And I guess I would say it's a little less organized in terms of, it's less formatted. So these were my early vocal influences. But then I started listening to a lot of great vocalists. It was only as an adult that I came to appreciate Ustad Fayaz Khan Sahab, who's hands down my favorite vocalist today. In my 20s, I listened to a lot of Fayaz Khan Sahab. And I would listen to that 178 RPM disc of Purvi. I've heard it thousands of times. Similarly, Ghulam Ali Khan Sahab's Bihag, 51-minute recording from that. I think it's from Jhankar Music Circle of Gyan Babu. I must have heard that a few thousand times. Each time you hear these recordings of the masters, something new is revealed because, there's so much data. It's impossible for the conscious mind to pay attention. There's mental fatigue when there is so much data being thrown at you. So it takes time, and it takes, for that kind of careful listening and combing through all those cavernous, reams and reams of data. It just takes a lot of time. So all of these recordings, Paluskarji's Hamir and Gaur Sarang, I must have heard again, literally thousands of times. Among contemporary vocalists who are performing today, I've heard Pandit Ulhas Kashalkar a lot. I think stylistically, I find great affinity with the way he, uses ornamentation. And I think it's almost like, Ulhasji's Alap is almost meant for Sarod. Yeah. And then among other artists, Pandit Mukul Shivputra is a huge influence. Mansoorji's vocal to a great extent. All of the Agra clan, Sharafat Khan Sahab, Latafat Khan Sahab, all of these people, I very kind of religiously listen to the few available lecture demonstration tapes of Vilayat Hussain Khan Sahab, so that I can keep reaffirming what I understand about ragas. So this is how my understanding of vocal music seeps into my sarod playing. How I started doing it and when I started doing it, I'm not so clear on that. But I think because of my 5-year association with Kollanda, it was in that period, I think, that I really became very focused on doing this, because he was also hugely influenced by Amir Khan Sahab, Fayaz Khan Sahab, and Bade Ghulam Ali Khan. So, there are many things that he did which I found very attractive, and I started doing them. And he was, just to give you a little nugget here, he was school friends of, he went to the same, he was in the same school year as Ustad Dilshad Khan, my guru's brother, my other guru's brother, Buddhadevji's brother. So they were very close. And Dilshad Khan Sahab was learning from Fayaz Ahmad and Niyaz Ahmad Khan Sahab in Bombay at that time, while my guru was a mathematics professor at TIFR. He was a visiting professor. He was still primarily at UCLA at that point, but he was a visiting professor at TIFR, and he would hang out with Parveen and Dilshad Khan Sahab. And so all the bandishes that Fayaz Ahmad Khan Sahab and Niyaz Ahmad Khan Sahab were teaching passed on to my guru, and thereby to me. So a stock of Kirana bandishes also kind of passed on in this way.
That is fantastic. Like, what a way. Who'd have thought?
Yeah. And then, of course, there is Yashwant Joshiji's teaching. And he was, of course, as we all know, one of the powerhouse performers of Gwalior Gaiki. And another very honest musician. There was no room for parlor tricks in his music. From the word go, it was established the rag, and he did it so well. He did it like within literally a minute. The rag stood before you. I was taken to meet him. I'd met him many years ago at All India Radio, Bombay, in 1998, I think. I was just finishing a recording, and I was having a really hard time with a staff tabla player that day. This gentleman was really focused on showing his seniority by essentially screwing up my recital. And my father was there with me, and I was in a foul mood. I was getting out of the studio, and Panditji was sitting there. His recording was next. And he called me to him and he said, "Hey, you didn't do all that badly. It was fine. Just be more composed going forward, because you're going to meet such people everywhere." And then he said that if you ever need any help with rags or, compositions, come to me. But that was many years later, almost a decade. I think not a decade, but shy of a decade later, that my friend Mayuresh Tendulkar, who's a dentist turned designer, who's also a Thumri and Khayal singer and teacher, he was learning from Bua at that point. And so he took me to see him. And that was when, that day, I had my first lesson from Bua, and he taught me Gaur Malhar. And so I continued going to him for about 3-4 years after that. Then he passed on in 2012. But there was a period when I, briefly went to the US. I was there for about 4 years. Sorry, not 4 years, 4 months in that particular trip. So there was a little break in my training under Bua as well. Because my wife, we were not married then, was a master's student at the University of New Hampshire. So I just packed all my bags and took off for Durham, New Hampshire in summer of 2007. And then I came back, and we were married a year later. So, but there was a break in my tutelage under Bua for a while when I was away from Bombay. But this is how it started. It was thanks to Mayuresh that I reconnected with Yashwant Bua and started learning from him. And yes, it has definitely impacted, just taking the tonal architecture of Khayal bandishes, also using the, rhythmic templates of Khayal bandishes, starting points being different from, typical guts. So I make a lot of Khayal style guts on the fly. So that's to some extent, to the credit of the talim that I got from him. Like, the other day starts on the third beat. Although this is very close to a gat of Vilayat Khan Sahib's also. This was pointed out to me by Pandit Buddhaditya Mukherjee. I sent Panditji a small clip of me playing this, and he particularly liked the antara that I had composed. But he said, "Hey, he was quite close to one of Vilayat Khan Sahib's compositions." But this was the kind of this is essentially a Khayal gat, which has also been imbued with some Sarod bols. Yeah, like Shubhranil is saying, that's absolutely right. Vilayat Khan Sahib's gat is gama pa dha pa ma gama pa ma ga re re sa. Yeah, I remember that now. But at that point, when I made this, I didn't remember. So the antara was something like. kind of placement ideas come from Yashwant Ji.
And some of his recordings, there are very few of those on YouTube, but I recently found some people have been uploading some new material. And amongst those, I heard, I think, an hour long recording of Chayanat, which was absolutely mind blowing right from the first second when he started his alap till the end of the Drut. I was just sitting here, like, it's
Yes.
so.
Yes, his ability to maintain an emotional intensity, a very steady emotional intensity, like it was remarkable. It would never fall below a certain level of engagement. Like what happens with a lot of performers is that it begins really well or it doesn't begin very well. They're like, lots of emotional kind of peaks and troughs. With him, it was not like that. There was a certain level of intensity below which it just wouldn't go. I think that was the very remarkable thing about him.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think the Gayaki that he has, that is the traditional Gwalior Gayaki followed by the Paluskars as well, right? And
Yes, in a way. I mean, although I think Yashwant Dua also he incorporated many aspects of Agra Gharana singing because he had spent some time studying with Pandit Jagannath Bua Purohit and also visiting Ustad Vilayat Hussain Khan Sahib. Although he didn't really formally learn from him, he spent a lot of time with Vilayat Hussain Khan Sahib. So he had a fair amount of Agra training, both formally and informally. But yeah, Yashwant Ji was a disciple of Pandit Mirashi Bua, who was in turn a student of Balkrishna Bua Ichal Karanjikar, who was the first person to have, one of the first people to have gone to Gwalior, actually learned there and then brought back this style to Maharashtra. So yeah, this is one of the branches. This is very close to the Balkrishna Bua branch of Gwalior is also what Pandit Vishnu Digambar Paluskar sang. So yeah, you can say that in that sense it's a close relative of the Paluskar Gayaki. Then there are other branches of Gwalior, like the Shankar Pandit family, Krishna Rao ji in particular, then Arolkar Bua, Sharad Chandra Arolkar also sang a different style of, I mean, more or less the same paradigm, but idiomatically different. And then you have, the other idiom of the Rehmat Khan Sahib's idiom of Gwalior, which is practically extinct.
like, are there no documented recordings of that style anywhere, or
We don't know. I mean, one says what one hears about Bhaskar Bua Bakhle's singing, and now I haven't heard his music. Or maybe there is one very dilapidated recording that I have, but I don't recall very clearly because some of these recordings, recording quality is really bad, so it's very difficult to discern. I think there are some there are some very short clips of Rehmat Khan Sahib. Then there are some recordings of Rajab Ali Khan from Devas, who was quite old and not in very great singing form. But yeah, and then there was Shagan Saab in Pakistan, Ustad Ghulam Hassan Shagan, who was probably one of our last connections to a strand of Gwalior Gaiki that kind of went missing. But yeah, not too many representatives outside of these two styles that we hear, namely the Shankar Pandit family and the Balkrishna Bua lineage.
okay? So now I have one more pretty special question for you. You were
Hmm.
talking about the structure of the Sarod and how it has changed and also retained most of its old qualities over time. Like you were saying, the fingerboard material has changed, the strings have changed. Now, you have played on a lot of different Sarods, ranging from absolutely old Sarods of the Buzurgs to completely modern design, state of the art ergonomic Sarods. So I would really like to know, like, uh, have you found that perfect instrument, or are you still searching for it? And like, how has that research been?
I don't think there'll ever be a perfect instrument because as the benchmarks shift, your desires also change and they evolve. So, no, there will not be a perfect instrument. Like, they will not, I don't think there'll ever be an instrument that satisfies everything that one craves. But one learns how to love a particular instrument and the output that it's providing you enough to say that, okay, this is it, this is enough. This is doing what I needed to do more than the bare minimum. Playing it makes me happy. So, with this instrument, which I acquired this year, I have found that sort of um, modicum of happiness where I can pretty much play everything I want to without struggling physically. And it has a pleasing tone, it has nice sustain. And it's also not too, it's well balanced in terms of the low ends and the top ends of frequencies. So it's not too mid-rangey either. So I'm really happy with this instrument that was built by Nobu Kumar Kanji, who's the Sarod maker in India today. I've gone through many iterations of Sarods with Nobuda, and he's always indulged me. Um, so I think the most I'll ever do is get a copy of this Sarod made. So it's a bit non-standard in some ways. So Sarods have been of various lengths. Now this is something. So I said that the Sarod has remained constant, yada yada yada. But that's not. Many things have changed. Like if you look at, there was this remarkable instrument that very old time pupil of Ustad Ali Akbar Khan Sahib had. His name is Shri Kailash Roy. He just passed away a few years ago. He had picked it up from one of the old music shops in Upper Chitpur Road, Kolkata. It was covered in pigeon shit, and he had spent months washing and cleaning it. And then he had our common friend John Barlow, who's a student of Pandit Radhika Mohan Moitra, and a music historian and sarod player in his own right. John is also a restorer of old instruments. So he actually brought it back to playing shape. That's a remarkable instrument for how big its sound is and how it's with Alam Bhai currently. Because, when Kailash Roy was about to pass on, he gave that instrument to Alam Bhai. It's a remarkably nice instrument and it has a great sound. But the length of that instrument is almost from the nut to the tailpiece is more than 32 inches. We typically, today's sarod players play on 29 inches because they tune to C. So, the playing length has an impact on how high you can tune. There's an inverse relationship between all things staying the same. There's an inverse proportionality between the playing length and pitch. So, shorter the scale length, the higher you can tune. Because with the same tuning, if you make the scale length longer, it gives your string has more tension. So, if you want to play higher, you reduce tension, you lower the scale length, and you're able to play at a higher key. So this is principally the reason, wanting to play at C and in some cases also at C sharp, because people play duets a lot nowadays. That sarod players have now started tuning higher and using shorter scales. But the longer scale length gives you a lot more sustain. So this is one thing that I discovered. So through the course of having this other Sarod with me, which is Ustad Muhammad Amir Khan Saab's Sarod, also was played on by his father, Abdullah Khan Saab. This is what, Radhu Babu had with him. Never played on it, but he had with him and then passed on to Kullanta, and then this came to me via that route. Now this Sarod, sorry, it's tuned to C sharp because I was using, although it's 28 and a half just from nut to bridge. This is a really long scale, but I have to tune it to C sharp because I was teaching sitar on this Sarod. But now this is an old instrument. It's about 140 years old. So what I learned by playing on this instrument is that if you have a longer scale length, uh, you can get more sustain out of your instrument. And a combination of a low action height and longer scale length gives you both um, unrestricted access to sustain and to tan speed. Because the higher the action, the more you're going to struggle to hold the string down with your fingernails while playing quicker tans. So these are the two primary learnings from this. But then this is a difficult sarod to play on because see the shape of the drum is like a bucket. So when I place my hand on it, you'll see that the rim of the drum actually cuts into my hand. So on the right hand, it's very difficult.
Right, it does look pretty sharp on the edges as well.
Exactly. So because of that, I don't perform on it as much. But I do practice, I do play on it because, every instrument has capabilities that give you new ideas. And this instrument has been a teacher to me. It comes with certain special qualities that constantly, in their own way, keep giving me new ideas. So I keep going back to this road. So yeah, this is kind of an heirloom, and I'm really, really honored that it rests with me today.
And the way you've maintained it, and it sounds like it's played almost maybe every day, if not every day, which is absolutely fantastic. That's like, I think the perfect way to preserve an old instrument is to
To play
play
it,
it and
yes, it deserves to be played. It's not, old instruments are not museum pieces because even in the
absolutely.
best of museums, I mean, who's going to restring it every month or put a new
Who's
skin
gonna
on
do
it?
the
It's
Jawari
it's
and
exactly. So like your uh, gurus, Ustadji Shahid Parvez Saab, he used to play on his grandfather's sitar. I think there couldn't be a better tribute to Wahid Khasab than playing his sitar. So yeah, that instrument was really something, eh?
yes, I've heard the old recordings
Mhm.
which he has on that. There's a fantastic Jinjoti which is also there on video on YouTube.
Mhm.
My goodness, it just fills the entire room up. One chikari and everything is just in place.
Yep, exactly. So these old instruments have their role to play, I think, in the development of a musician. But coming back to new instruments and ergonomics and the like, sorry, I hope I'm not taking too much time. But
Absolutely not. This has been a very intense discussion and I'm having a lot of fun. Let's keep going.
okay, because I know that this can sometimes cause a bit of audience fatigue. Um, but okay, so new instruments, well, as I said, reduction of action height while maintaining a certain playing length. Although I have come to a bit of a compromise when it comes to the playing length. So most modern players play at 26.5 inches from nut to bridge. I play at 28 because my fingers are long enough that fast tans are not really such a big hurdle even at that scale length. Yeah, I'd play a lot faster if I were to play at the standard scale length. But I enjoy the sustain a lot more. I enjoy playing alap in kind of all its colors, I think a lot more than many of my contemporaries do. So that's one of the reasons why. So I decided, so this Sarod has, it can go to 29. And so when I got it from my guru, it was at 29, which was difficult for me. I didn't have such long fingers. Um, so then, because 29 and a half is the actual nut to tail piece length of most modern Sarods. This one act scale length goes to 29. Just imagine how long it is. So I arrived on 28 as kind of a safe compromise. So my current instrument is about 30 and a half inches long from nut to tailpiece. So there's a 1.5 inch gap, right, between the tailpiece and the bridge. Um, in terms of ergonomics, this is something that I worked out a long time ago, um, making the neck a lot slimmer. So the original idea was inspired by Prathush Banerjee. What he had done was he had shaved off the entire neck down to here. So he had like a single barrel sarod, a single bout. There wasn't much of an air chamber behind the plate. But because I am such a stickler for the acoustic sound, I wanted a second chamber behind the plate, so that the high frequencies of the sarod, kind of the shimmer frequencies, would not be so compromised. So I devised a way to arrive at a compromise between his design and having a second bout. So I'm still able to play without any trouble up to the higher purr on my third finger when I'm playing up here with fingering, and yet be able to, enjoy the kind of balance of the mid range and the shimmering highs. So this was one of my design ideas, and Noboda loved it, and he does it on all Sarods now. So a lot of the new Sarods built for younger players by default have this design.
The upper part of the neck of your new Sarod is actually almost as slim as the 50s archtop guitars and all, because nowadays guitars have very slim necks, but Sarods always had like
Yeah,
huge
slightly
mammoth.
thicker.
It's
Exactly.
just like there in between, which I found really like a very fun point about your Sarod.
Yeah, so it makes moving around in this range, which is where we play the most. Like, this kind of. This area is much easier. So that was one of the things. And then, I played around with planetary geared pegs for quite some time for my main strings and the chikadis. And they do make the sarod extremely stable. Their turning mechanism is in the center, not here. So these are friction pegs, the standard friction pegs, but very nicely fitted, properly fitted. So things have improved in the sense that, instrument makers used to go at it with a round file, use their intuition and hope for the best. That's not the case anymore. I mean, Noboda uses a modern peg shaper and reamer set, and the pegs and the peg holes are perfectly matched. So even that is a huge upgrade over traditionally made Sarods. or sitars or whatever. But the planetary geared pegs add a certainly add a higher degree of accuracy of tuning. And they are a pleasure because in a concert the sarod simply doesn't detune. Otherwise, you see sarod players constantly retuning their mur string. This happened today a little bit because this is a teak sarod, and teak instruments take a little more time to settle because teak is an oily wood. Anyway, um, so yeah, I'm probably going to get rid of these friction pegs as well and replace them with cello pegs, like planetary geared cello pegs. It's just that they're very expensive, so you need some time to save up to uh, buy them. One set of these costs in excess of like £300 in the UK.
Ouch, that's like a huge burn.
I know it is quite a burn, especially for an ICM guy.
And custom instruments in general, like there are so many iterations you keep on making, changes you keep on making. They do in turn tend to become really, really expensive.
Yeah, and all of this is self-funded, right? Nobody's gonna sort of fork out
Absolutely.
the cash for you. So yeah, this has been going on for years. At this point, I find that I have to rationalize the expense. Yeah. Sorry. So is that enough about the instrument, or
No,
did
no.
you have
I
any
I
specific
guess we'll
questions?
move on to the next question.
Okay.
So, okay, this is also a bit controversial. Like a lot of people have a lot of questions about this. So now we come to the expression of a raga. So, uh, again, I know that you and a lot of musicians that I look up to, you guys try to find that harmony, that balance between what the mind wants and what the heart wants. So what is your opinion on that? Like how should one approach a raga properly?
I think the way I was taught, the way I was taught, the heart is incapable of asking for something that the mind doesn't want. I was taught right from the beginning, especially after starting to learn with Pandit Buddhadev Das Gupta, um, in a way that harmonized what you call dil or dimag. Okay, in the sense that you're so tied within the salient expressions of the rag, is that you seek to beautify your expression of it. The rag is already there, its phrases are already there, they are beautiful, right? You make them lead you rather than try to lead them and turn them into what they may not want to be turned into. So if you accept the fact that the rag is greater than you while you're playing music, and I think that's generally been my approach, then this disharmony, this question simply doesn't arise. I simply allow the core phraseology, the skeletal alap, to lead me throughout. So I've never faced this dilemma. And I'm being dead honest here. I mean, I can understand how you might get the same answer from someone which may not be a very sincere answer. But in all sincerity, I have not faced this issue because my heart does not desire anything that falls within well, that falls outside the boundaries of a raga.
In that way, you have been one of the rare fortunate students of Indian classical music.
I have indeed, because at no fundamental level did any of my teachers disagree on what constitutes a rag. So although I've learned with, you can say predominantly with four people, none of them disagreed on what that rag is. It's not like one of them rubbishing the other's idea of uh, that rag. So, for example, they might say that, like one time Irfan Khan sahab told me, "Kamod mein gama dhapa mat karna, wo thoda hamir jaisa lagta hai." He said that to me. But I still do it because it appeals to me. But I do it less. I sought to moderate that. Like, his advice was do. This would be his approach. Rather than, which I do anyway, but none of them rubbished anything that I had learned summarily from any of the others. So clearly, I was in good hands right from the beginning.
And about performances, like, what is your opinion on the ideal performance? Like, if you were in the audience, what would you love to listen to? Like,
What would I love to listen to? I mean, a lot of dead
in an
people would have
artist,
to
the
be.
qualities in a performance.
Yeah, if we can have a zombie conference, I think I'd be very pleased. I think a lot of dead people would have to be resurrected in order for me to really, really enjoy music. But today, as I said, in vocal music, I love hearing Ulhas ji and Mukul ji. I would, I would walk some distance for their performances. I love the music of Pandit Jagdish Prasad, whom I also have had the good fortune of hearing live many times. Did you get thrown on offline? So, in hi, are you there?
Yes, yes, I'm there. My camera just got disconnected for some reason.
Okay. So, in terms of an ideal performance, do you mean vocal or instrumental or overall?
No, like overall, if you're attending a concert, like what would those qualities, what would be those qualities that you'd want to see in a performance, like a dream performance?
That's just too. That's a very loaded question, loaded and leading question. Simply because if I say that I want to hear, when I hear vocal music, I want to hear an open voice throw like Kesar Vaiji. Um, I want to hear wazan and distribution of the same in tans rather than speed. When I say I want to hear, proper articulation of karnswaras in a tan, and then all of that tying themselves together to create like a holistic rag performance. I think that's asking for too much. But I've been very fortunate. I've heard a lot of great people live. I was, yeah, a lot of these people belong to my parents' generation or just slightly older than them. So I was able to hear even Mansoor ji live a few times. I heard Gangubai ji. I heard Pandit Bhimsen Joshi. I've heard many times live. Pandit Firoz Dastur, um, who gave some remarkably good morning concerts where I lived in IIT Powai. So a lot of these vocalists, I would give an arm and a leg to hear them again. Also, Pandit Jagdish Prasad, whom I've already mentioned.
Absolutely, he's one of my absolute favorites as well.
So, and of course, I've heard Kishori Amonkar ji many times live. Um, yeah, I mean, kind of variable levels of engagement because, she was who she was. She was this person who lived the music, but at the same time, there were days on which she would not be very engaged, and then there would be days on which she would be completely sublime. So yeah, all sorts of concerts. So living in Bombay that way, I think, really enabled me as a child to hear a lot of great masters of, especially of vocal music. But yeah, so I wouldn't be able to tell you what an ideal concert would be today based on the parameters that I like in vocal music. An ideal sarod player for me, if I may really sum it up, would be somebody who has the rag depth of Ustad Ali Akbar Khan and Pandit Radhika Mohan Moitra, the pitch accuracy and tonal finesse of Ustad Amjad Ali Khan sir, and the baaj of Pandit Buddhadev Das Gupta. And, to also add to it the gut repertoire of my Ustad.
That's like I used to watch Power Rangers when I was a kid, and they would take their little robots and form a huge robot called a
Yeah,
Megazord. This is just like a Megazord of Sarod.
yeah, exactly. So I can only fantasize about, what I'd like to hear on my instrument. Yeah, I mean, I have my opinions on what the ideal sitar player would be as well, but I think we've seen quite a few people come very close to that because on the Sarod, I don't think that such a thing has yet happened. But there are people who are pretty damn close. I mean, there are some amazing, amazing Sarod players out there today.
And what's your opinion on the entire social media craze now? Now, ever since the pandemic, we've been all stuck in home and like no concerts, no venues anywhere, just like digital gigs and pre-recorded live shows and everything. So right now, everyone's after views, likes, subscribes, and there are reels and like so many ways of reaching out to the audience. So, what's your opinion on that?
My opinion on that is separate from what I do, I suppose. When somebody does something because it makes them feel good, I think they should. I mean, if musicians miss adulation, musicians to feel complete, I think a lot of performing artists need that kind of high that they get from concerts and from the admiration that they receive from audience members. Many are addicted to it. I would say that if that floats their boat, that's fine. Um, Over the years, I wouldn't say I have become a reluctant performer, but I enjoy performing. But when I'm playing a concert, um, it's not really hugely different from one aspect of my riyaz, where I'm actually sitting down to play a rag. As I said, my riyaz is very compartmentalized. It's not about the technical practice, which I do again in a very compartmentalized, modular way. But when I sit down to play a rag at home, it's no different from me playing on stage. So, in that sense, the adulation, admiration, reactions that people usually try to solicit while performing, I I have made myself immune to those things to a great extent. Yes, when somebody is out of line and rubbishes something valid and reasonable that I have done musically, that pisses me off. There's this woman, Shelja Khanna, right, who writes music reviews on The Hindu and so on. She knows nothing about music. Absolutely nothing. She's like a rank beginner. वो उतनी भी नहीं है. But she's from one of those, privy purse houses, like one of the royal families of North India somewhere, Punjab में कहीं से. तो उसका हक बनता है म्यूजिक के बारे में लिखने का. So she had rubbished one of my concerts, which was actually pretty all right. It was played in a different mood. I didn't show off much. I played a very sukoon ka concert. And she pretty much rubbished it, saying this guy doesn't know how to play the sarod. अरे भैया पहले कुछ गाना बजाना सीखो, अपने हाथ से अपने गले से कुछ निकालो, फिर जाके क्रिटिक बनना. So वो बात गई. But my point is, unless somebody goes to that level of idiocy, I don't react. I'm pretty immune. Like, अच्छा बोलो तो बहुत अच्छी बात है. I'm very happy if you praise my music. If you don't, if you dislike my music, I have no problem with that either. I mean, dunya bahut badi hai. The world is a very big place. There's room for everybody. So, in that sense, social media validation doesn't really matter as much to me. I mean, I do have all these things like an Instagram handle, a Facebook page, Twitter account, and everything, but I use them mainly to share some bits and pieces of my music and dog photos. That's about it.
Absolutely. I follow all of your posts, so you can ask me.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
So now we come to the final question, which is again, yeah, controversy alert. So we go to social correctness and diplomacy in the world of music, which we
I think I've
always
just destroyed it a few moments ago, but let's get to it anyway.
let's get to it. It'll be fun.
Uh-huh.
So, do you think it's a necessary evil? Nowadays, we are, and of course, we should be concerned about mental health of individuals, and musicians are also
Yep.
individuals, and people, as you said, critiques demeaning musicians, this, that, and musicians running after musicians, pulling them down,
Yep.
and gurus, musicians, audience, you name it, and there's dirt. So, what is your view on social correctness? Like, is it a necessary evil which should be there to restore the harmony and balance amongst people and make them not want to kill each other?
I think such disharmony exists because, um, the amount of resources available for this music is very small compared to the number of people who are engaged in it. Now, to make matters worse, a small number of very well known musicians consume most of the resources that are available. So let's just say that there's a certain, sticking specifically to my field, there is a certain Sarod artist who charges 10 to 14 lakh rupees for a concert. He's not that much better anymore than the next guy. There used to be a time when this individual was really leagues better than the next guy simply because there weren't so many people playing Sarod at that time. Now this individual has aged, does not play as well as the next guy, but still feels that he can get away charging 10 to 14 lakh rupees for a concert. Now, in India, of course, what happens is that once you are branded a certain way, and as I said, audience discernment is next to none. So once you have that branding, you can pretty much get away with murder. So the dissatisfaction in the ranks really stems from the fact that these sorts of people have been getting away with practically anything and everything for a couple of decades now. And there isn't enough money to go around, to be honest. So if somebody can charge 14 lakhs for a concert, it means that some poor schmuck in Calcutta goes hungry. Okay? That's the equation. And this is exactly why we are where we are today. So a little bit of equity, a little bit of concern for others, a little bit of sense of community, helping each other out. There have been times where I haven't been able to take a concert, and I immediately told the guys, "Hey, call Abhishek Borkar." I've done that, and there's no shame in admitting that he's also a fantastic sarod player. Or in some situation where I have been institutionally able to invite someone, I have invited Alam Bhai to play a concert. That's how it should be, I believe. That there needs to be a community of, created around mutual respect, which I think is beginning to emerge also among, the good part, the silver lining is that in our generation, or maybe, among musicians who are a little older than us, like, Babuida, Shobhat Roy Chaudhary. He does this festival commemorating his illustrious father, Shorbari Roy Chaudhary ji. And he's invited all of us, like Obhikta, Shubhranil, myself, to participate. And similarly, this Bansuri virtuoso Jay Gandhi hosts concerts in his home in Brooklyn. I've had the great pleasure of playing for an audience solely of musicians there. Obhikta does the same thing for other people. So this is the kind of stuff that I would like to see happening more. And I'd be more than happy to do my share as well for others. But unfortunately, this kind of, because I think of the fact that some of these older musicians grew up so materially insecure, and their struggles were probably much more acute than our own, while they were also playing very high quality music. It's like initially when some of these folks came onto the scene, they're probably getting treated like dirt, and they decided that that's the way to treat people who come after you. It's like acute Stockholm, right? Not Stockholm exactly, but it's kind of a learned behavior where you are first the oppressed, and then once you get a little bit of power, you start oppressing, because that's the only way you can corner all the resources, of which
Right.
there
You
aren't very
probably
many.
think this is how the world is. Maybe this is how it works.
Yeah,
So let's just go with the
yeah.
flow.
Yeah, just makes people cynical and self-serving. And that's exactly what this older generation of musicians are. Unfortunately, they should shudder when they see themselves in the mirror. And I've only mentioned one artist, but then you have similar cabals in Kolkata. I think Kolkata is really very badly infected by this virus, because it's also, it's been a city in economic decline for a long time, but there is a huge amount of musical talent, and also a huge number of people who should not be professional musicians in Kolkata, but they are. So then you have this situation, a very acute kind of haves and have nots kind of situation in Kolkata. And those who have kind of cracked the code are they're masters at maintaining their grip, both on power and economic resources and connections.
And they're also treated like gods. That's one more thing. That's
That is
that's not
Stockholm,
on
isn't
them.
it?
That's on the people.
Well, that's the people on one hand, and also those who are oppressed by them also treat them like gods, thinking that this is the only
Right.
path to emancipation. So that is Stockholm.
And this is what I think makes people, like in religion, we see two kinds of people. We see people who are God fearing and
Yeah.
people who are God loving. So we can like see the clear distinctions in every city probably nowadays.
Yes, yes. I'm all for respecting all hues of philosophy and belief. I think every kind of worldview, as long as it is not an extremist one, as long as it's not one that seeks to cause harm to others, should have an expression. But that should not be at the cost of another point of view. And I'm all for diversity of artistic expression as well, within the defined parameters of what constitutes Hindustani music. But I think that the very ugly face of, as you said, social correctness and this and that, and the other thing that we must talk about, very touch upon, is the false humility that you see everywhere.
Right, right.
I mean, there is an artist, or there are artists who will be like, you if you compliment them, they're like, नहीं मैं तो अभी सीख रही हूँ, मुझे तो कुछ आता ही नहीं. And this person's out there, charging mega bucks for a concert. And what do you make of such people? I mean, they're hypocrites and reptilian in their behavior. Yeah, but I think it all stems down to a lack of equity, acute lack of resources, and an intense competition to survive. I've been very fortunate that I've been able to secure my means of survival one way or the other. And for a long time, my music didn't do it, so I did many other things. I wrote articles, I edited books, uh, completely unrelated to my field. But yeah, I worked as a copy editor, I worked as a technical editor for publishing houses. I even, very early in my life, I worked in banking. Um, today, if you put me on the street, music would be able to feed me. I would be able to sustain myself at the bare minimum through music. But yeah, so I did a lot of different things to survive. But I wanted to do it on my own terms, and I didn't want to, you know, have to go to an organizer and say and ridicule myself by having to touch an organizer's feet, which I realized that a lot of artists do, as it was shown also in The Disciple. Yeah. So these are the sorts of
Absolutely.
things.
I
Yeah.
think that movie was very important to all of us. It was very eye-opening indeed.
Oh yeah, he's done a really wonderful job with it as Jagan. Yeah.
I remember one night I was up at around 3 o'clock and I get a text from Obhigda saying that, have you seen this movie? If not, watch it right now. And I sat down to watch it right then, and it's a
Yeah,
very beautiful
exactly.
experience.
Yeah, it's a fantastic film, and I think it really addresses a lot of these issues that we are talking about today. So yeah, it's very important for a musician in this field to secure their means of survival, but the lesser harm we are able to do to others in that process, I think the better it is for all things and for everybody.
Absolutely, I completely agree with you. Like, anyway, we are so less in number. Okay, like people who want to make real music now. If we try to tear each other down, just results in a lot of bad, which we really don't want at this point. We have nuclear bombs waiting for us everywhere, and then
Yeah, and then you've got
this.
also you've got senior artists going on, going to the media and being interviewed by absolute imbeciles, telling those people that all music is good music. There's no difference between classical music and pop music. Then why the fuck did you waste so much time learning how to play? You know. So these are the sorts of things that I absolutely hate seeing. And I am going to continue calling them out because, hey, one thing that I've realized about these guys is that you can't shut me up simply because you are no longer able to stop me from feeding myself through music. So since I can do that, I can pretty much say whatever the fuck I want.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's like no way, no two ways to go about it. And okay, before we close off, I just wanted to ask you one last thing. That apart from being a performer, a researcher, you have absolutely been a fantastic guru as well, and I have attended your workshops and I really look forward to attending more in the future. So I would really like to know that what made you take up teaching and music education so seriously. I can understand some of it by this entire conversation we had, but I would really like to know it from you before we close the discussion off.
Right. Okay. So to round things up here, I think one part of it is that it comes naturally to me because both my parents are teachers. So my dad taught chemistry at IIT Bombay, and my mom used to teach physics in a college in Bombay. And all that we really talked about around the dinner table was students teaching and this and that and research. And so I grew up in that sort of an environment where it's almost like second nature to start preparing teaching materials and notes. And my dad would meticulously prepare slides. This is before PowerPoints. He would actually sit down with projector markers and plastic slides and whatnot. And so I assisted him in that process. So I always had somewhat of a natural knack to prepare teaching materials. And I've thought long and hard about how to convey my ideas in a way that somebody could absorb easily. And learning from Pandit Buddhadev Das Gupta has made me an effective teacher of beginners. I think all of Panditji's students are good teachers of beginners. You will see that, all like Abir, for example, has created someone fantastic. Abir Hussain has created some really wonderful students like Swarnendu, who's playing really well. My own student Shayan is playing well. Uh, so yeah, definitely the beginner pedagogy comes from there to a great extent, because the basic melding of technique with rag is something that was given ready made to us. So I'm not going to claim credit for it. The credit belongs to him. Teaching more advanced students in, I have been a very focused and dedicated listener myself, and so I keep encouraging people to listen very carefully to the recordings of the great masters, and to keep their ears open, because once your filters are in place, once you know what to listen for, what to accept and what to reject, then you can listen to anything and find good stuff, right? So I could listen to, I mean, I don't need to say that I could listen to anyone. I could listen to somebody who may not even be such a great performer, but I might find something interesting worth adopting in that artist. And that's been my approach to learning, and I keep telling my students to have that approach, that even if you didn't like the whole concert, there will be something in there that you did like. Own it, make it yours. So
Right.
yeah.
I ref to these as the moments you take back home from concerts. So,
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes you want to take the whole thing home, but
yeah,
that's
yeah,
okay.
yeah, absolutely. Put it in a truck and just haul it back home.
Yeah, that happens. That's happened. I've had those moments, and I've been very fortunate to have had many of those moments in my early days. Hearing some great musicians, and yeah. So yeah, I must also add, just to come back to my early listening, I also heard a lot of live concerts of Pandit Buddhaditya Mukherjee. I think for me to the real push for me to start doing serious riyaz came from watching him. Like, how can somebody play like that, like jaw-dropping stuff? Anyway, so coming back to the concluding question, I think what makes me a decent teacher is, yes, the familial background, the fact that I was always around teachers, the fact that I went to a school where almost every teacher sucked, uh, and they hated me for asking questions. So I determined very early in my life that I'm never gonna um, prevent. If I am ever a teacher, I'm never gonna stop people asking questions. So I think that makes me a decent teacher. And finally, yes, I've also been able to monetize my teaching to some extent. And although I also teach many people for free, those who can't afford it, um, or for a hugely discounted fee, for those people who live in India. I mean, a lot of the times, what I charge people isn't even a living wage here in Canada, but it has to go on. Some students who are more fortunate than others have subsidized the rest of them. That's how my teaching works. So yeah, I've just been able to find a very happy balance in terms of uh, being able to impart whatever little that I have acquired over time, and in being able to turn it into something that's a reasonable means of my own survival.
I think this is the best part which I find about your entire personality. You have that very beautiful balance where everything is going on, everything is in harmony, and whatever impact that's coming out of it, that's for the greater good. That is what I like the most about like your personality, and that's why I really, really, really love talking to you, and I respect you a lot and your work.
Thank you so much. It's very kind of you to have me here, and to uh, have such a charitable opinion of everything that I do.
No, really, we really, really thank you a lot for coming here, for agreeing to do this. It's been a rather improvised show today, so
Yes, it
Upaj
has
has
been.
really lived up to its name.
I hope
But I
so.
had a lot of fun hosting you here today, and I think now it's 11 o'clock. It's 11:21,
All right.
so
Yeah,
we're
it's
gonna
very late in India, so we should definitely wrap up. And yeah,
yeah.
I'm
Today,
sure
people,
that
I guess.
yeah, an audience attrition I'm sure has been significant, but these things have to be said.
Absolutely. And I think this was the most fun dinner table conversation that they might have had for a long time.
Some people, I suppose, and some others would have been like, "Oh, क्या बकवास बोल रहा है यार, छोड़ यार, ये तो मतलब देखने लायक ही नहीं, ये आदमी ऐसा ही है." I get that reaction all the time.
No, no, before we get more enraged mobs, I think we should sign off tonight. But really, thank you so much. And everyone, thank you for watching. So we're gonna be saying good night now, and have a good day, have a good night for people all across the world. So bye, see ya in 2 weeks. And thank you again, Arnabda. Have a
Most
very
welcome,
good day.
and thank you. Yep, you as well. Good night.
Namaste. Bye.
Namaste.